All right, so here's our time, and what we did is we removed this, or we commented it out, so that we are now passing in time as a value parameter, okay? So we're going to execute this, and we get the same thing in memory. So here's memory, and T1 is an object, hours, minutes, and we get 1 and 15. T2 is an object consisting of hours and minutes, and its its explicit constructor sets hours and minutes to 3 and 45 respectively. Okay, so now we're going to call swap. Time is a value parameter. So what we're doing here is we're going to pass in a copy of T1. Pass in a copy of T1. It's no longer going to be another way of referring to T1. It is a completely different copy. Okay, so here's the activation record. Here is the time parameter for swap over here, and it is going to have an hour and a minute. Okay, and I'm going to copy T1 into time. So T1 is 1 and 15. And now that I've mapped the actual parameters to the formal parameters, I execute this method. And I've got temp hours. And I take hours, which is T2's hours, and I assign it to there. And then I take time hours, which is 1. It's this time. It's not T1. It's this time. And I assign those to T2, so that gets 1. And then I'm going to take temp hours and store it in time hours. So I take 3 and I store it here in 3. And you're thinking, oh, that looks pretty good. Oh, no, it's not. T1, this is a copy. I'm operating on the copy, not on the original. So now I create temp minutes, and I store in that minutes, which is 45. Then I take time minutes, 15, and I store that in minutes. And then I take temp minutes, which is 45, and I store that in times minutes. So I replace the 15 with 45. Now, here's what happens. This is when the story turns sour. When this method terminates, what happens to the activation record? Well, it gets destroyed. So does temp min, so does temp hours, and guess what? This value parameter time, it's also deallocated. So bye-bye activation record, bye-bye time, bye-bye temp hours, bye-bye temp minutes. Execution, so control goes from the swap method back to main, and we execute T1 print. And guess what? It prints 115. Because we were not changing the original, we were changing a copy. And then now T2 got changed. T2, it changed T2 because we called the swap method of the T2 object. So it's the parameters that we made the copy of. I mean, the object is the object. The swap is manipulating T2 because we call the swap method of the T2 object, right? But it's the parameter that came in as the copy. And that's why those changes were not reflected in the original when we return back to main or return back to wherever we called this method from. So very important to understand the difference between value parameters and variable parameters. And variable, I mean, it means to change, right? Now, one thing you cannot do is you cannot pass a literal into as a reference parameter. And the reason is because literals don't have addresses. So you have to pass an object, and that will give you a syntax error, okay? So this formal parameter, so actual parameters for value parameters must be objects, okay? They can't be literals. They must be objects because what we're doing is they must have, have an address, right? Because what we're doing with the reference parameter is we're passing in the address of the original object. So literals don't have addresses. So you have to always pass in an object here, and that's a compiler error.